Welcome everybody to the Hanuman Jayanti celebrations 2022 at our institute. Let's begin with the prayers. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi आबाहु पुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः मनोजवं मारुततुल्यवेगं जितेन्द्रियं बुद्धिमतां वरिष्ठं वातात्मजं वानरयूथमुख्यं श्रीरामदूतं शरणं प्रपद्ये श्रीराम राम रामेति रमे रामे मनोरमे सहस्रनाम तत्तुल्यं रामनाम वरानने हरिः ओम्। So today is Hanuman Jayanti, and Hanuman is a very special god. He's a very special deity. He's a special deity for Guruji. He's a special deity for our institute. The idol of Hanuman stands atop our institute, blessing us, guarding us, protecting us. Also, our institute celebrates the Hanuman Jayanti every year with talks and mainly intended to receive blessings and learning. Now, incidentally, Hanuman is also a very special god to me personally. Since childhood, if anybody asked me when I was a child, who is your favorite god? I always used to say Hanuman. And everyone in the family remembers that because I had a special talent of puffing my cheeks and making myself look like Hanuman. And I used to use the yoga belt as a tail attachment and jump around the place, pretending that I was Hanuman. Even later in college, I often used to go up in the institute near the Hanuman idol to study, particularly if the exams were the next day and I was unprepared and the subject was very difficult. And that has always helped me. So I feel very special today to be able to speak on Hanuman Jayanti about Hanuman. Hanuman is normally known as a god who is very strong, very powerful, a lot of valor, a strong warrior who fought with the forces of Rama, etc. He is also known as a great bhakta, a great devotee who surrendered himself, all his deeds, everything completely to the service of Rama. But if you look at how Hanuman enters the story of Ramayana, the epic of Ramayana, that is very interesting. Hanuman enters that epic quite late. He enters it in the Kishkinda Kanda, which is the fourth of the 6 parts. And what shines there is what is known as his Vakpatuta, his expertise in speech, his learning, his refinement, and his culture. So Sugriva, the king of Vanaras, the king of apes, he sends Hanuman, his senior minister, to find out who are these young, resplendent, warrior-looking 2 brothers, Rama and Lakshmana, and why are they here? So Hanuman's job is go and talk to them and find out who they are and why they are here. Rama and Lakshmana listen to Hanuman speaking and questioning them. And then Rama has nothing but words of praise for Hanuman. And let us hear what he says. Now, Rama himself is said to be very learned, a great Vidwan who has learnt all the Shastras, etc. So praise coming from Rama directly, it's already something very great. So here's what Rama says. He says, Nan Rugveda Vinitasya, Na Yajurveda Dharinaha, Na Samaveda Vidushaha, Shakyam Evam Vibhashitum. So someone who has not been cultured by the study of Rigveda, someone who does not hold the learnings of Yajurveda, someone who is not an expert in Samaveda, that kind of a person cannot speak like this, says Rama about Hanuman when he listens to Hanuman. Rama is talking to Lakshmana. So look how Rama has appreciated. The first thing he appreciates about Hanuman is his refinement of speech. He says, Rama says, Nunam Vyakaranam Kritsnam Anena Bahudashritam Bahu Vyaharatan Anena Na Kinchit Apashabditam. He says, surely he has learned the entire Vyakarana. And if you remember, 2 years ago, I had given a talk in the Patanjali Jayanti about the intricacies of Sanskrit Vyakaranam and the greatness of Vyakaranam or grammar. So here Rama is saying that this fellow who is talking to us, surely he has completely learned the Vyakaranam because he has been speaking for quite a while. Bahu Vyaharata Anena, he has been speaking for quite a while, but not a single flaw in his speech. Na mukhe netrayor vapi lalate cha bruvostata anyeshvapi cha gatreshu dosha samvidita kvachit, says Rama. He says, neither in the face, nor in the eyes, nor in the forehead, nor in the eyebrows, or in any other parts of the body, any other limbs, there has been any flaw, any dosha that is evident in Hanuman's speech. So that is clear for somebody as insightful as Rama to see that the Satya is flowing directly, cultured by Saraswati when Hanuman is speaking, and therefore there is no bodily part that can betray anything different from what is in Hanuman's mind and Hanuman's speech. Then Avistaram, Asandigdam, Avilambitam, Adrutam, Urastham Kantagam Vakyam, Vartate Madhyame Sware. So he says, whatever he spoke, it is neither too much, neither too elaborate, not filled with doubt, nor too long and slow, neither too fast and hurried. And a speech that has come from his chest, the heart region, Uras, then from his kantha, the throat region, whatever speech has come is shining in this sweetness and its right timbre. So once again, in the Sanskrit tradition, in the Indian tradition, there are multiple layers of speech or conscious thought that's referred to as para, pashyanti, madhyama, vaikhari. And these are esoteric things. And each level is also associated with the region of the body. So here Rama has recognized that when Hanuman is speaking, his very prana and the very nada that brings out the speech is completely tuned to his conscious thought, his buddhi, his mind, and the body. Samskara krama sampannam adritam avalambitam ucharayati kalyanim vacham hridayaharinim. Says this speech is so sweet and is so auspicious, kalyani, full of good samskaras. So good samskaras, as you know, are these esoteric latent impressions coming from deeds that is there in the embodiment in the chitta. So his samskaras are so pure, which is so clearly visible in his speech. His speech is not too fast, not too slow. He speaks pure and auspicious speech, ucharayati kalyanim. And it steals away my heart, he says. Vacham hridayaharinim. His speech has stolen away my heart, says Rama. So Rama here is speaking to a stranger because Hanuman is meeting him for the first time. And this is the impression Hanuman is creating in Rama. Rama says, Anaya chitraya vacha tristhana vyanjanasthaya kasya narariyate chittam udyata ser arerapi. Says with this kind of wonderful speech, which is perfectly there in all the three regions of speech within the body. Whose heart will it not steal away, even if it is an enemy with a sword raised? Udyata se he. Asi means sword. So udyata se, even if there is an enemy standing in front of him with the sword raised, this speech will steal away his heart. So this is the introduction to Hanuman if you are reading Ramayana from the beginning. So we have to realize that even though in the popular culture, Hanuman is known for his strength and valor and his devotion and bhakti, there is an aspect of culture, refinement, and learning steeped in Indian tradition, in the Shastras. That is the first thing that Rama notices. And at the time, Hanuman is in disguise of a Brahmin. He is not in his usual the Vanara form that you see in the photograph here. And immediately Rama is able to recognize and give high praise when speaking to Lakshmana about Lakshmana is Rama's brother, about Hanuman and his refinement and culture. So the first thing we notice from our context of yoga is the importance of swadhyaya, because that is where all the learning comes from, the importance of clarity of speech, clarity of thought, and clarity of erudition. And that is what Valmiki, as the composer of Ramayana, first brings out as a key characteristic of Hanuman. So Hanuman, if you think of him, is somebody who has karma. He has great deeds, valorous deeds that he has done. He has jnana, because we have seen the first thing that impressed Rama is his jnanam, his speech. And then, of course, he has bhakti, complete devotion to the Lord. So, with this, that is the tapas swadhyaya and ishvara pranidhanam that we have seen. Tapas swadhyaya, ishvara pranidhanani, kriya yoga. We have seen in that in the context of niyamas, etc. So, Hanuman is this exalted being who is an embodiment, serving as a shining example for all of us on being multidimensional and excellent in deeds, excellent in jnana, knowledge, excellent in bhakti, and still having surrendered his ego and having everything in control. Therefore, in the sloka that we recited, Manojavam Marutatulya Vegam, we call him Jitendriyam. He has complete control over his senses. And therefore, Hanuman, we see why he is so special. The other aspect is, when we look at any of the Shastras or Darshanas, there is this triad called Tattva, Hita, and Purushartha. Tattva is the ontological basis. What are the real entities in this philosophical system? It may be Purusha, Prakriti, etc. Purushartha is what the goal, maybe Kaivalya, Moksha, liberation. But how do you reach the Purushartha? That is known as Hita. And Hita, there are several things like Karma Marga, Jnana Marga, Bhakti Marga, etc. And as far as Hita, Hita means whatever is good. So Hita, you will see Hanuman by him encompassing this jnana, karma, bhakti, everything. He's the embodiment of the Hita in the Tattva, Hita, Purushartha. And he is the savior, therefore, the embodiment of what we would call a savior. So this is Hanuman. There are so many stories of Hanuman. And there is a famous tale of Hanuman as a little child. It's a Shishu. His jump at the moon, that is a very famous, jump at the sun. It is a very famous story where his mother Anjana, who is also an ape, she has gone to the forest to collect fruits for the baby Hanuman. The baby Hanuman looks at the sun rising and he thinks it's a delicious fruit, like an orange or an apple, and therefore he jumps at the sun and he reaches the sun. So the story is very colorful. It says he's faster than Garuda, faster than Vayu, and so on. And he reaches the sun, and then the sun, there is a big story there where there is the sun, there is Rahu, etc. And then Indra is invoked to save the sun from the grasp of this baby Hanuman, who is so powerful. And then the Indra hurls his weapon, the thunderbolt, and Hanuman falls at the ground and hits his chin. And chin means Hanu. And because of that, he is said to have the name Hanuman has come to him. That comes from this very endearing story of this baby jumping at the sun for want of the fruit. So here we see the story of how after this, usually the recitation of the story ends here. They say, okay, this is the greatness of the child Hanuman. But after this, a lot happens. Because then Vayu, who is Hanuman's father, Hanuman is known as Vayu Putra, son of the wind god. So Vayu, Hanuman's father, he gets angry at Indra. He says, why did you throw the thunderbolt at my child? He's just a baby. And how does Vayu's anger manifest? It manifests as Vayu is the Adhishtatra Devata. He is the deity of the Prana Tattva that is within us and within all the living beings. So Vayu in his anger plays havoc with the functioning of the prana. And specifically it is said, like the functions such as excretion, wind mutra, it says, that was completely stopped by Vayu. He didn't allow that to happen in his anger. And obliquely, Ramayana brings in the importance of prana and importance of Vayu as a devata in showing how once Vayu gets angry, the entire, it's known as Praja, the entire creation is helpless. And then they have to run to Brahma and say, save us. So then they have to appease Vayu. So there is a very nice saying, a couple of lines, as to how they appease this Vayu Devata, who is the superintending Devata of Prana. So they say, Shariram hi vina Vayum, Samatam Yati Darubhihi, Vayu Prana Sukham Vayuhu, Vayu Sarvam Vidam Jagat. So Vayu is everything, they say. If there is no Vayu, this body is just like a log of wood. Shariram hi vina Vayum, Samatam Yatu Darubhihi. So it is a non-living, just a log of wood. So Vayuhu Pranaha. So Vayu is Prana. Sukham Vayuhu, the intrinsic life and the comfort and the ability to live in peace, in happiness comes from Vayu. Vayu Sarvam Midam Jagat. All this world, it says, is Vayu. So they are extolling the virtues of Vayu, which is a learning to us as students of yoga, the importance of prana, the importance of breath, and the importance of kriyas to understand the position that Vayu holds and how Vayu holds Hanuman so dear as Vayu Putra. And therefore it is said that the specialness of Hanuman, how he embodies not just jnana, karma, bhakti in terms of hita and the marga, but also in terms of tattva, the entities that you are working with, prana, vayu, etc. Hanuman has a very special place because he is the one that helps us control vayu. So the Hanuman as a devata that we have to worship, admire, and be devoted to, can bring in the right culturing within us. As we study more about Hanuman and more about yoga, it helps us build our own culture to understand how all this system sort of operates. Then there is a very nice story of how Hanuman wants to learn. He's so eager to learn when he grows up. Again, he jumps at the sun every day. And as the sun is going, as it rises and as it sets, Hanuman is sort of flying backwards, always facing the sun. And he wants to learn the Shastras from sun's mouth directly. So this also has significance because in the Bhagavad Gita also, Krishna says, Imam Vivasvate Yogam, Proktavan Aham Abhyayam. So he said a very long time ago, Krishna says, me, Paramatma, I had given this yoga to the sun god. Then the sun god Vivaswan gave it to Manu, etc. So Hanuman is directly learning these Shastras through his own activity, through his own enthusiasm. He is jumping to the sun and following the sun in sort of a reverse. He is facing the sun and is flying in the reverse fashion, learning the Shastras from the sun. And then Hanuman gets a lot of blessings and powers, etc. That's sort of well known. So that is about Hanuman, that is about Vayu, that is about Prana, and the clear place of Hanuman in terms of Jnana, Karma, and Bhakti, that should all surface into our minds the moment we hear the utterance of the word Hanuman or looking at the image of Hanuman. And we should have the ability to link it to our field of yoga so that we draw the deep appreciation that needs to be there in our minds. Another episode from Ramayana, which is again a very favorite episode for me, is when the Vanaras, the apes, are looking for Sita, and Sita has been carried away to Lanka by Ravana, the Asura, and they don't know where he is, and they come to the sea coast because Lanka is on the other side. But how do you cross the sea? So these Vanaras are discussing among each other. They're asking, can you jump so much? Can you jump? So then there is this story, someone says, okay, I can jump 60 yojanas. Yojana is a unit of length. There is some debate. It's usually said about 12 kilometers and so on. So one of the Vanaras says, I can do 40. Someone says, I can do 60. Someone says, I can do 100. But Hanuman is silent, completely silent. And Jambavan notices that. And he says, why are you not telling us how much your power is? And Hanuman says, I don't know. That is something very endearing. Hanuman simply doesn't know how powerful he is. So he is not able to say that. And then there is a backstory narrated later that there was a certain curse due to which he wouldn't know. And then it is revealed to him when somebody asks. But the thing that I notice, or that we should notice here, is the purity and innocence of Hanuman, of how he spent his life cultivating his capacities, cultivating his jnana, cultivating his strength, cultivating his power, all within himself, not for any purpose, not for any goal, not for any showiness, so that he absolutely doesn't know how far he can jump. But when these abilities are cultivated, circumstances themselves come to him. Jambavan comes to him. He says, I know you can jump. You may not know it, I know, and please jump. And then Hanuman is able to grow in size and jump and cross. And there is a very, in the Sundara Kanda, there is a big narrative of how he jumps across the sea and so many adventures on the way. So what we should notice is the innocence, the purity, and the importance of cultivating our inner abilities, like Hanuman followed the sun learning the Shastras, without really worrying about how to show it, how to present it, or how to use it. If everything is cultivated, the time will come when it will all automatically get manifested because the world would need it. There are many such episodes. So there is the episode of Hanuman getting the entire Sanjeevani mountain, like you can see in the picture there. He is asked to get a herb. He can't find the herb, he gets the whole mountain. And then showing Rama in his heart. We won't go into all those stories today, but I hope I have been able to convey the what we have to look for in Hanuman and what are the special parts that may not be so well known. Hanuman, he is also universally popular. So that is also special. In India, with so many gods, there are also so many sects and groups. Someone will say, okay, I'm a follower of Vishnu, I'm a follower of Shiva, I'm a follower of Lakshmi or Devi, and so on. Hanuman is universally popular. Whether they're little children or youth or old men, women, everybody adores Hanuman. So that is another specialness that we have to see, because his stories, his role that lend himself to various different personalities can relate to some facet of Hanuman, and they will have him as a protector, as a friend, as an ideal, etc. Hanuman is also said to be an Amsha or an avatar of Shiva. So while he is serving Rama, who is an incarnation of Vishnu, Hanuman himself is said to be an Amsha of Shiva. So that is Vishnu and Shiva, but Hanuman is also said to be the Brahma of the future. So it is said, Sarvasu Vidyasu Tapo Vidhane Praspardateyam hi Gurum Suranam Soyam Nava Vyakaranarthavetta Brahma Bhavishyati Te Prasadat. Says this. So this is being said to the Paramatma. He is saying, Sarvasu Vidyasu Tapo Vidhane, in all the Vidyas and in all the tapas, he can give competition to the guru of all the gods. Okay, Praspardatayam hi Gurum Suranam. So that is the ability in Vidya, in tapas of Hanuman. He is a Navavyakarana Arthavetta. Again, you can see the specialness of Vyakarana coming here. Sanskrit grammar, Sanskrit language, the refinement there. And we had seen in the talk of Patanjali Jayanti, how Patanjali, as the author of Mahabhashya, has an exalted place in Vyakaranam. Again, you see, this Hanuman he knows the meaning of all the 9 Vyakaranas. Nava Vyakarana Arthavetta, Brahma Bhavishyati. He will become the Brahma. So Brahma is also a position in the Indian tradition. There are multiple cycles of creation. And Brahma is the first being who learns the Vedas, or who is given the Vedas from Sriman Narayana, and then he creates all the universe and all the creation. So Hanuman, he says, will become the Brahma because his capabilities are so high. Hanuman is also said to be a Chiranjeeva. Chiranjeeva is one who has no death, one who lives forever. So there is so much more about Hanuman. Hanuman, other than Ramayana, he appears again in Dwapara Yuga. So Ramayana happens in the Treta Yuga. The next Yuga is Dwapara Yuga. And there are thousands of years in between. But as a Chiranjeevi, he has a role to play in the Mahabharata. He is on the flag of the chariot of Krishna that Arjuna is riding. And Krishna is the charioteer. So there is a lot to cover about Hanuman, which we won't go through, but by touching upon so much, you would realize the place that he holds. Now, there's also a very interesting Adhyatmic metaphor for the story of Ramayana, which says Rama is the Paramatma, the universal being. This says Sita is like the Jivatma, the individual being. Now, what happens? Sita sees the golden deer. The golden deer is like the prapancha, the samsara, or also referred to avidya, maya, that will ensnare you. So golden deer Sita looks at it, the Jiva, individual soul, and she says, I want it, I want it. And she is led astray. Then she is captured by Ravana with 10 heads. So it says 10 heads is like the 10 sense organs. So the Jivatma is captured and under the snare of the 10 sense organs because the Jivatma was deluded by Maya. So now this Jivatma wants a reunion with the Paramatma, with Rama. So who goes? Hanuman. Hanuman jumps across there because he embodies the Hita, all the Marga. Whether you say karma, whether you say jnana, whether you say bhakti or all three, everything is there in Hanuman, and he is the one who goes, reaches the Jivatma, uplifts it, and brings it together into union with Paramatma. I thought this is a very beautiful Adhyatmic interpretation also of Ramayana, which we can keep in mind as we are reading the various stories, etc. And especially as the culture of yoga, the culture of yoga is that anything outward is also correlated with something inward. Vayu, in the Chandogya Upanishad, you will see the Vayu outside, the Prana inside. There are parallels drawn, and there is certain insights that come from that. So similarly, here is an Adhyatmic metaphor that we have to keep in mind. The other thing I sometimes feel is Guruji. He has been likened with Hanuman so many times. His very look, his eyebrows, his the tejas, the splendor, and his power, his vigor, etc. He's been likened with Hanuman. So if Guruji is Hanuman, then who is his Rama? His Rama was the subject of yoga. So he was completely devoted to the subject of yoga. His deeds were exalted. And just like in the Adhyatmic metaphor, Hanuman went and brought the Paramatma to Sita, Guruji went and brought the subject of yoga, his Paramatma, to this world, the modern world that we inhabit. So Guruji essentially, as Hanuman, with yoga, all his life, everything was dedicated to yoga. Whether he's taking classes, whether he's giving lectures, demonstrations, etc., everything was steeped in yoga. But it was a yoga which was a very active yoga. So he brought this to the world, and he served as the bridge that the Hanuman also we see. He served as the means. And he had the karma, jnana, nishtha, karma nishtha, jnana nishtha, bhakti nishtha, all of that he could embody. The other thing I feel is, just like Hanuman, when he was asked to bring a herb to cure Lakshmana, he got the whole mountain. Similarly, Guruji, with his 200 plus asanas of light on yoga, with so many props, then the medical therapy, etc., he got the entire mountain of yoga to us people, as an Hanuman, as a savior, to uplift us and take us to the, as it says, to divinity. So that is another link which I find it keeps coming to mind when we hear of Hanuman and Guruji together. There is one more Adhyatmic import which is often missed. So I thought I'll bring it up here. And that is the friendship between Sugriva and Hanuman. Sugriva is the king of apes. And Sugriva is said to be the son of the sun god. So Surya Putra. Whereas Hanuman is the son of the wind god, Vayu Putra. So there is one verse in the Ramayana talking about their friendship. It says, Sugrivena samam tvasya advaidam sidravarjitam. So advaidam, so they are united with, so Hanuman was united so much with Sugriva, chidravarjitam. There was no gap, there was no difference of opinion, etc. Abalyam sakhyam, right since childhood. Abalyam sakhyam abhavadan. Abalyam sakhyam abhavat anilasya agnina yatha. So this is the import I wanted to bring in. There is friendship since childhood, just like that of the wind and the fire. Anilaha means the wind. And for us, for yoga, it refers to the internal vayus and prana, along with Agni. The friendship between the vayu and the Agni, the prana and the Agni, is embodied by the friendship between Hanuman and Sugriva. And if you look at the texts of yoga, whether it is your Yoga Upanishads, whether it is Yoga Yagnavalkya, all the kriyas, it says Marut Vannina Saha or Anilaha Analena Saha. Anala again means fire. So always the kriyas are said to be done with the vayu or prana along with the internal agni element, vanni, anala, etc. So that thing which is so significant to yoga, whether it is in the context of health, internal health that it brings out, or the various pranayama kriyas, or even in concepts of kundalini, etc. There is always this combination of Marut and Agni. And here we see Sugriva and Hanuman embodying the Agni and the Marut, and their friendship is right since childhood. So, as students of yoga, we have to draw inspiration from this and then help deepen our understanding of yoga through these kinds of verses that we will encounter in Ramayana, etc., which come up as stories but actually have layers of depth within them. Okay, so there is a lot to learn from Hanuman, a lot to adore about Hanuman, a lot to worship about Hanuman. He has this unique blend, action and renunciation, because he was very active, but he had completely renounced all the fruits. So that is Ishvara Pranidhanam, complete surrender of all his deeds and the fruits of all his deeds to his Ishvara, which was Rama. So that blend, but highly active. So the unique blend of action and renunciation. Then he had suppressed his ahankara, his ego, entirely through Shraddha, through his faith in the Lord. So even though by nature, look at him, by nature he is a monkey, he is an ape. So there are episodes where he'll go uproot trees, destroy gardens, because that is his nature. So if we as human beings, if we are unable to culture our own indriyas, how much more difficult it might be for somebody born as a monkey or an ape to win over their indriyas. And that is what Hanuman has done, and yet engaged in activity. And the aspect of Hanuman as a monkey and ape is there prominently in Ramayana. It is not that he looks like a monkey or ape, but actually he is treated like a human being. No, the monkeyness, the apeness is clearly evident. And then in that form, being able to control all of that, it is a sort of a huge accomplishment. And that Jitendriya of Hanuman, he is specifically embodying by being in the form or being of the type or the jati of a monkey or the ape, Vanara. Sita also had words of praise for Hanuman. So Sita said about Hanuman, she said, Atilakshana Sampannam Madhurya Guna Bhushanam Buddhya Ashtangaya Yuktam Tvamevarhasi Bhashitum. So now Sita is talking to Hanuman, and he says, okay, you are full of so many good qualities. There are so many sweet, Madhurya Guna Bhushitam. You are ornamented by sweetness, she says. Buddhyahi Ashtangaya. So Ashtanga Yoga is something we know. And here this Ashtanga also applies to the Buddhi. And there are also Ashta Gunas of Buddhi that we won't go into today. It is Ashtadhi Gunaha. But she says, Hanuman, Buddhya Ashtangaya Yuktam. You have that. Only you can speak so well, she says. So once again, we see the entrance of or the manifestation of Hanuman's quality and culture through his speech, recognized by Rama in a certain way and Sita in a very ladylike way. She sees the sweetness, she sees the aesthetic beauty and the purity of Hanuman through that. And she, in her insight, she says, Buddhya Ashtangaya Yuktam. And in fact, there is a very amusing episode where when Sita is in Lanka, surrounded by demonesses, because she is captured by Ravana, Hanuman comes. But Sita doesn't know who Hanuman is. So now how does Hanuman approach her? So he doesn't want to scare her. So he is thinking, what should he do? And very interestingly, he deliberately does not speak in cultured Sanskrit, because he fears that if I speak in my Sanskrit, the very good language, cultured language, she might think it is just Ravana coming in the guise of a monkey. So let me behave like a monkey. And there is an amusing, very normal, raw speech that he speaks. And that also brings it the very innocence and the wit and charm of Hanuman, how he approaches different situations and deals with them. So when we learn about these things and we think about the deity, so there are so many deities, there are so many asanas in yoga. So each of them have an aspect of culture. So the very thought, so if yoga is about culturing the chitta, it is about culturing what the alambanam, what is the support of chitta, what is the thought substrate in the chitta. So when we think about Hanuman, when you think about the right qualities, automatically that is culturing our chitta. When that is culturing our chitta, that very culturing leaves behind samskaras or impressions. Those samskaras are going to come up again, surface again, and bring in culture again. So each of these things that we do, it is actually taking us further in the path of yoga. And therefore, thinking about Hanuman, understanding about Hanuman, understanding the depth of the various stories, it is a culturing that is in the path, the same path that yoga would take us. Now, there is a very nice composition called Vanara Gita. The different Vanaras are praising Hanuman. It's there in the Parashara Samhita. So one of the lines it says, Buddhir balam yasho dhairyam nirbhayatvam arogata ajadyam vakpatutvam cha hanumat smaranad bhavet. So if you just remember Hanuman, you get buddhi, you get bala, you get yasha, success. So buddhi is the right culturing of the intellect, balam is power and strength, yasha is success, dhairya is boldness, nirbhayatvam, no fear, arogata, complete health, ajadyam, no lethargy, no laziness and full of life, vakpatutvam, so culture in speech, etc. This happens just by remembrance of Hanuman. So there is also a Yoga Sutra, if you remember, it says, Vitaraga Vishayam Va Chittam. So in the Chitta Parikarma, it says, if you have as a support of cognition for your Chitta, some other Chitta which is free of desire, your own Chitta also becomes free of desire. So similarly, if in our Chitta we have the thought of Hanuman and his mind, his Chitta, our own Chitta is purified. And therefore the purification, the Siddhi is so high. That is what these lines says, Buddhir balam yasho dhairyam nirbhayatvam arogata ajadyam vakpatutvam cha hanumat smaranad bhavet. So this is what happens when there is a remembrance of Hanuman that surfaces in you. But for that to surface, we need to know enough about this. We need to have thought enough about this. And therefore there is this Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam, etc. on how to learn so that the memory triggers all of this to come up. And then that purifies our own chitta. Okay, now back closer to home, closer to the institute. There is this saying that whenever Ramayana is sung, etc., Hanuman appears, it says. And I distinctly remember it has happened multiple times in the institute here, where we have one of these programs and somebody cites a langur on the wall, in the lawns, or on the compound wall. It's not just a small rhesus monkey, it is actually a langur with a black face and a long tail. And all of us we used to scream that, oh, Hanuman is here, Hanuman is here. So that is a very special memory in my mind. And this has happened not once, it has happened multiple times. And there is a very nice, again, a very rhythmic composition in a Panchachamara meter about this. It says, Bhavanscha yatra yatra tachlunoti Rama kirtanam karoti tatra tatra bhoso bhashpa mastakanjalim pradehi menjanasu tatvadiya bhakti vaibhavam videhi me niranjanam cha Rama dasa dasatam. So it says, you, wherever you hear Rama Kirtanam, the name of Rama, you come there and with tears in your eyes, you bow down your head. And I remember even in Bellur, in one of the pujas, while this was happening, there were the monkeys, and also somebody came, like a child wearing all the clothes of Hanuman as soon as the Ramayana started there. So it is very fascinating when these things happen. And then it says, Pradehi men janasuta tvadiya bhakti vaibhavam. Give me bhakti towards you. Videhi me niranjanam cha Rama dasa dasatam. So let me be a dasa of the dasa of Rama. And there is again in the tradition, there is this line of thought that it is better to be a devotee of a devotee than a direct devotee. And similarly, then there are verses that say, let me be a devotee of a devotee of a devotee. So here we see Ramadasa Dasatam. So Ramadasa is Hanuman. So make me a bhakta of you. So I become the Ramadasa Dasa. So it is a very beautiful thought captured here, which also brings up memories of our childhood, where we used to have monkey sightings in the institute, especially when there were programs, etc. happening. Okay. So the last thing, again, closer to home. See, as a family with Guruji, etc., we were not a family who goes to parties, who goes to movies, etc. But I distinctly remember where me and Mugdha, my wife, we asked Guruji, saying, there is this movie and will you come? All of us, let's go as a family. And then people were wondering whether he'll say yes or no. And happily he said yes. So we were really, and we bought some 13, 14 tickets for all of family to go. And we went to E Square, had a wonderful time. And that movie was Hanuman. So there was a movie called Hanuman, which was an animated movie, and us with entire family, including Guruji, all of us had been there and completely enjoyed that, probably some 15, 16 years ago. So I think with that sweet memory in mind, and with Hanumat Smaranam, as mentioned here, I think I'll end my talk for today. Thank you.
Namaskar, all of you. So you just heard Srineet talking on the day of Hanuman Jayanti, telling us about Hanuman. And it began with a quite a highlighting factor, because for popular mind, Hanuman is known for his strength, power, and then his Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, Ashtama Siddhis, strength, power, valor. That's how the popular mind knows Hanuman. But he brought that unique aspect of Hanuman, that his speech was exaltedly evolved. And usually that is the factor which usually popular mind overlooks. Nobody understands Hanuman from that perspective. And that also gives a clue that the pranayam and the vak, the speech, has such a close relationship. Pranayam, as believed by people in our times, is not something just to do with the breath and breathing, but the vak, speech organ, comprising of para, pasyanti, madhyama, vaikhari, is so important. And if Hanuman is known for his prana shakti and his pranayam, it is because of his vak. And Srineet told us that how Sri Rama at the first instance was influenced by the speech of Hanuman. So the vak kriya, vacha, is so important in pranayam, which in our times we don't correlate the speech with pran and pranayam. So unique perspective came right at the beginning of his talk, which we should take note of. Otherwise, the popular mind always thinks of him as great devotee, great bhakta of Sri Rama, and then Gnani, Buddhimatam Varishtham. And the verse which he recited in the beginning, Manojavam, Marutatulya Vegam, Jitendriyam, Buddhimatam Varishtham, Vatatmajam Vanarayutham, Shri Ramadutam, Sharanaham Prapadye. So certain attributes of Hanuman, they have caught the popular mind. They have appealed the popular mind, but one doesn't go into deeper aspects of it. So Sri Rama identified the greatness of Hanuman not because of the greatness that we identify Hanuman with, but his vak chaturyam, his eloquence, his intonation, his word selection, his precise and accurate speech, faultless speech, the speech based on the truth. So that is the aspect which Sri Rama identified in Hanuman when he got introduced to him in Kishkindha Kanda of Srimad Ramayanam. Then another point, let me delineate on it, which is aspect of Hanuman Rahasya. Because many other people wonder why there is a monkey god. Those who are not familiar with the Vedic pantheon, Vedic culture, for strangers, it is indeed strange to conceive as to why there is this monkey god in Indian pantheon, and why Hanuman opted to be in ape form rather than a human form. So there is a beautiful aspect which comes in Hanuman Rahasya. Because if Dasa, the subservient, is in the same form, like Rama was in a human form, and suppose his Rama Sevaka is also in human form, then what happens is there are certain allurements to get clothes of Sri Rama, footwear of Sri Rama, because human beings are used to those things. There will be footwear, there will be clothes, there will be other ornaments, etc. Possessions of human being. And in order that there should not be slightest attachment to those things, Hanuman, as a great bhakta, opted to not to be in human form, because otherwise there would be some kind of allurement or some kind of attachment. And then maybe request Sri Rama, please, can you give me your old dhoti, old uparanam, old footwear? So in order that such attachment should not be there, that is one of the reasons which is described in Hanuman Rahasya, which is a traditional kind of inquiry into the Rahasya aspect of all Deva Devatas. So Hanuman did not have any attachment for Ram's clothes or all those possessions that human being would be having, or Rama in human form would be having. Rama was wearing clothes as human being wear the clothes. He had the things like footwear, etc. And he had ornaments, etc. But then subhumans will not have any attachment for those things. So that is one of the factor why Hanuman manifested in ape form. That Hanuman's great contribution to religious consciousness is, otherwise there is usually a divinity and devotee, Bhagwan and Bhagavata. Hanuman created a step between, and therefore the religious consciousness of the lore brought the concept called Dasanudasa. Dasa of the Dasa. Because we know the divinity is unmanifest. The divinity is not accessed by human mortal empirical intelligence. But we can understand a Dasa, a person who is subserving divinity called Bhagavata. Bhagavan cannot be attained by we mortals, but we can see Bhagavatas around us. The God cannot be sighted, but the servants of God can be sighted. The devotees of gods can be sighted. And then it's a wonderful route to be connecting ourselves with divinity via devotee. So the concept of dasanudasa came in with advent of Hanuman avatar. So that's a great contribution to the religious consciousness of the Vedic religion, Sanatana Dharma. Now, Rama is easily an icon to a devout mind. The Ramayana projects Sri Rama as Purushottama Sri Rama. And therefore, Sri Rama is idealized by devout minds. And Hanuman, as the devotee of Sri Rama, is again exceptional condition that he became a deity to mortals, to human beings. So it is one of the rare instances where the Bhagavata himself has become a deity. And therefore we have temples of Hanuman, we have Hanuman Upasana, we have worship form for Upasana. There are devotees of Hanuman. Who is devotee of Paramatma? Bhagwan Sri Rama. So usually the devotees don't become deities, but Hanuman as a devotee became a deity ever since his manifestation. So Dasanudasa concept and the Dasa becoming the deity by itself is a unique aspect in the life of Hanuman. So that is another aspect that we should make note of. Then Srineet often referred to Guruji being devotee of Hanuman. Now usually people think that it is because Hanuman was personification of Ashtanga Yoga accomplishment. And we get to know about his Ashtamaha Siddhis at his fingertips, Anima, Mahima, Lagima, Garima, etc. All the Ashtamaha Siddhis were at the fingertips of Hanuman. But Hanuman as Vayu Putra, then Hanuman as personified Jnana Yogi, Karma Yogi, Dhyana Yogi, Bhakti Yogi, Ramopasaka. He was also Upasaka of Sri Rama. So Hanuman's life should be studied, and then we can understand how he was personification of Jnana, Dhyana, Karma, Bhakti, Yoga. So all forms of spiritual practices were unified in Hanuman. And being Vayu Putra, Hanuman almost got recognized as Prana Devata, presiding deity of very life force. And Prana and Hanuman, their association, their relationship or their amalgamation, or another factor why Guruji had a special affinity for Hanuman. And that is why he had the plan to install Hanuman on the top of the building. At that time, there were no stairs to be reaching there. And all our Guruji's grandchildren remember how Guruji used to carry them. There was a rope hanging from top, and they would do climbing with the help of the rope. So Guruji would carry each one of them on his waist and climb up with the rope and reach the Hanuman. While today you have easy, comfortable staircase to reach atop. So later for other students to be reaching that shrine on the top of the institute, later the staircase was designed. But before that, staircase was not there for quite some time. And we remember Guruji would climb up with these grandchildren and take them atop. You heard the story about how Hanuman got a typical kind of shape of his chin, whereby he is called Hanuman. Hanu means the chief part. And you heard the story about it. And more often we would see that while Guruji would be in his meditative position and meditative practices, his face would resemble Hanuman's face. So the affinity that Guruji had for Hanuman is something that we should never forget. And the generations to come in our Iyengar Yoga should never forget. So Guruji was Hanuman Bhakta, Dasa Anudasa. And therefore, we as students can be Dasa of Dasa Anudasa. Because Guruji himself was Dasa of Hanuman, who was Dasa of Sri Rama. So you heard about Srineet saying that Dasa, Dasa Anudasa, and then Dasa of the Dasa of the Dasa. Then he also brought in that aspect of the metaphor, Adhyatmic metaphor of Sri Rama as Paramatma, Sita Mai as Jivatma. And as the case is, that the Jivatma is often getting away from Paramatma. And that is why the case of Jivatvam comes, because one is away from Paramatma. And therefore the Parama Purushartha is getting the union of Jivatma with the Paramatma. And that is one of the definitions of yoga which you have heard about. The samyoga of Jivatma, Paramatma itself is yoga. So Hanuman was the link to unite Sri Rama and Sita Mai, who were separated on account of 10-headed Ravana, who was a master of the world, but slave of his Jnana Karmendriyas. And the slavery to senses, slavery to Jnana Karmendriyas brings the bondage. And that is the one which separates Jivatma from Paramatma. So the Hanuman was the uniting factor. And that Hanuman can be also considered as a prana. And therefore the yoga, which has the centric aspect of breath and prana in all its endeavors, all its practical aspects, that is Hanuman. And therefore, the seekers of yoga, even if they are not devotee of Hanuman, if they are practicing yoga, they will have to have that bond with the life force and the very breath. So our breathing is adhyatmically Hanuman within us. And that the breathing is the one which unites and breaks away the viyoga and brings in some yoga. And that is one of the reasons why Guruji had devotion for Hanuman, fondness for Hanuman, reverence for Hanuman. So Patanjali and Hanuman are they were the two personal deities for Guruji. Because through Hanuman as Vayu, Hanuman as Prana can only create a possibility of union of the finite with the infinite. So that was the approach of Guruji in pranayam. So Hanuman has great significance in pranayam in particular and entire yoga in general. It is with the prana shakti and with the shwasa kriya that ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, parigraha, shausha, santosh, tapaswadhyaya, ishpranadhan can actualize in yoga. They are not moral ethical principles, they are ethico-religious principles. They greatly depend upon prana, prana kriya, prana shakti, shwasa, shwasanam, and the vayu. He also told us how the vayu is so important in animate manifestation. Because the chaitanyam, that animation is because of vayu. And that is why Vayu Devata has unique place. Therefore, one of the Shanti mantra says, with regards to Vayu, Namaste Vayu, Tomeya Pratyaksham Brahmasi. He is the Brahman, Vayu, or we who are replica in the form of microcosm. So Vayu becomes so important for all animate creation. And therefore, Vayu Putra becomes that much important. So also he told us about Sugriva and Hanuman association. Sugriva being son of sun. And Hanuman being Suryopasaka. You heard that he was seeking knowledge, that essential knowledge from sun itself. And that is why Sugriva and Hanuman had unique association in Srimad Ramayanam. And let me tell you about Bhagavad Rahasya finally, that when Bhagavan is going to manifest as avatar, all the deities want to follow him. So in Srimad Ramayanam, all the deities, celestial forces, celestial deities did appear in some form or the other and assisted Sri Rama, Bhagwan Sri Rama. In Krishna Avatar also, all the celestial deities manifested in subserviency of Bhagwan Sri Krishna. So that is Bhagavad Rahasya. When it is a Purna Avatara, all the deities they want to manifest along with Avatar of Bhagwan. So it is not only that Bhagwan Sri Rama manifested, along with him, all the celestial class of those higher abodes, they all came down. So also another rahasya, when a life is born, even our life, you and me, when we are born, all those celestial forces do come in. And that is the Aditaivic constitution within us. So when the life is born, the Paramatma is internal ruler, Antaryami. So when the Paramatma is in it, all the deities want to be wherever Paramatma is. And therefore, even we in our mortals, we have immortal assembly of immortals, Deva Devatas. They all have assembly. That is the Adidaivic dimension of human manifestation or life manifestation. So the Adhyatmic metaphors, you heard few of them when Srineet was talking to you. But the Adhyatmic metaphors tell us about the reality of this creation. The divinity is not taking a place in the seventh heaven or beyond, but in the entire creation, that principle is subsuming, permeating, and as an antashasta, internal ruler, the Paramatma is in the universe, which is the rahasyatmak meaning of Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, Vasudevam Sarvamiti, Vishnumayam Idam Jagata. So the divinity is very much with us. And the Rahasya of Srimad Ramayanam divulged will tell us about that aspect of reality. It's not just a story of Treta Yuga, of Sri Rama Avatara, but how the Rahasya aspect, mysterious aspects are also divulged in Srimad Ramayanam. It's not just a story of Bhagwan Sri Rama, but with a greater insight, we are told about the reality, Adi Daivik, Adi Bhutik, Adhyatmik. And if finally, let me tell you, we all worship Sri Rama as Bhagavan, and we want to have devotion for Sri Rama. And that's why we hear this. We should love God. But life of Hanuman tells us, if we should be loving the God, whom does the God love? So the Sri Rama or Rama Lakshmana Sita are a great combination of the absolute principle for us. So we all would be loving Sri Rama when we know about Srimad Ramayanam. When we are influenced by Srimad Ramayanam, we would love Sri Rama. And the question comes up, whom does Sri Rama love? It is Hanuman. So we want to develop love for him, is the absolute ultimate principle to be loved, but the ultimate principle loves Hanuman. Therefore, it is said that you can be offending Bhagavan, but never offend a Bhagavata. You will not be spared. You might offend Bhagavan. Bhagavan will pardon. But we should never offend a Bhagavata. Bhagavan will never pardon. So Hanuman was beloved to Sri Rama. Hanuman was Bhakta of Sri Rama, but Sri Rama had a beloved in Hanumana. I recall Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Ramanuja Bhashyam, where 4 kinds of bhaktas are described: Artha, Arthati, Jignasu, Gnani. And Ramanuja beautifully comments on Gnani Bhakta, where Bhagwan, in kind of his own language, says, my Bhakta is my Atma. If our Atma is Paramatma, if our Atma is divinity, divinity's Atma is his devotee. So we can now understand where Hanuman stands, because he was Atma of Sri Rama, while Sri Rama was Atma of Hanuman. And that he showed in one of the episodes. When he was questioned, you speak about Sri Rama, where is your Sri Rama? Where is your Sri Rama? He tears apart his chest and shows Sri Rama in his chest. So that shows that Sri Rama resides in the heart of Hanuman, while Rahasya tells us that Rama's heart had Hanuman. This is the relationship between the Bhagavan and Bhagavata. So in spiritual plane, the lover and beloved have unique relationship. They are in each other's heart. So we can now understand what Hanuman is when Sri Rama found his beloved in Hanuman, while Hanuman was lover, bhakta of Sri Rama. So that is the adhyatmic kind of rahasya behind Rama Avatara and Hanuman Avatara. So Srineet brought to light certain unusual things about which generally we don't think about. We just look at him as a manifestation of power, strength, maybe a little wisdom, but the grammar. So understand, grammar is not just for structure of language, but it is grammar is for structure of wisdom. Precisely, Vyakaranam is for wisdom. Grammar doesn't improve the wisdom of a person. Grammar only improves language of a person, corrects the language of the person. But there is no word for Vyakarana Shastra, Vyakaranam. It structures wisdom based on truth, permeated by truth, and manifested truth. That is Vyakaranam. And Hanuman was great authority in Vyakarana Shastra, Sangita Shastra, Veda Shastra. You heard about it. That Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda is flowing from his speech. So no amount of description of Hanuman will suffice to convey the greatness of Hanuman. But anyway, Srineet showed a unique perspective, brought a unique perspective for us to think over, ponder over. So with that, I offer my humble obeisance to Hanuman and his devotee, Guruji. So, namaskar, all of you.